After 15 years of misery for the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Wolves have finally made a competent team. Once trading Kevin Garnett, their whole franchise pretty much fell apart, missing the playoffs for over 10 years. Then they went through the Kevin Love era where they didn't make the playoffs. Then they traded Kevin Love for Andrew Wiggins, a promising player that they thought could lead their franchise. They then drafted Karl Anthony Towns and just started to rebuild, and at the time looked like one of the best rebuilds in the entire NBA. Then they traded for Jimmy Butler, but that turned out to be a pretty bad trade for them. But now, the Wolves have made some really solid moves. They drafted Anthony Edwards, they traded for D'Angelo Russell, and now they're currently the 7th seed in the playoffs, having a very good team that future-wise looks super impressive. I'm personally think this future is really scary. So before we start, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, as it further motivates you to make more videos like this. So the Timberwolves are currently 8th in offense, 13th in defense, and 1st in pace. Now they of course have a young team, and they love to run the floor, which we'll see how that goes in the playoffs. But first, let's talk about their defense and their defensive identity they've built over this season. Karl Anthony Towns has improved as a defender over the years, and now I would say is an average to above average defender. D'Angelo Russell has improved, being that, yes, he doesn't have the most physical tools, but he is a leader. He makes sure everything is switching, they're communicating, and he's definitely improved a lot. Jared Vanderbilt is their lockdown defender who, yes, he isn't that like Mikal Bridges, Kawhi Leonard type defender, but he's still a solid defender that can make the other team's best player have a pretty rough series. Patrick Beverley, of course, we all know who Patrick Beverley is because he's just so scrappy. Tenacity is always going to be there, and he was such a big pickup. Nas Reed, another solid backup center, and all of these guys are all scrappy defenders that are willing to grind out an entire game on defense to get a win, and they've just bought into this defense. Defense, in my opinion, is the best way to change your identity and your whole team around. Just look at the New York Knicks last season. They had 2 years ago, they had one of the worst teams in the NBA. That they had what like such they had one of the first picks in the lottery, but last season they flipped their entire defense, being like the fourth best defense, and they were the fourth in them in the Eastern Conference. And because of that improved defense, where before they were like bottom 5, bottom 10 in defense, they changed pretty much their whole team around. And then look at this year now. Their defense went back to around middle of the pack, and now look where they are now. They're like the 12th seed in the Eastern Conference, one of the most disappointing teams in the NBA. So I do think that for a team that is struggling, defense is just a key. Look at the Cavaliers this year. They changed their whole defense around, built around Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, and look where they were. Now, of course, they did fall off a little bit because of all the injuries, but defense brought this whole team around. And I think that this is what's happening with the Wolves. Just they've bought into this defense. They have defensive players now. Like before, they had all pretty much one-way players that were all good on offense, but really bad on defense. But now their defense has improved and their overall record has improved. And also their offense. Just they always have the talent to be a good offensive team. They have 3 players who can drop 30 points pretty much any night with D'Angelo Russell, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, all being an instant bucket that can just take over a game at times. And that offense, along with the defense, is what makes this team super scary. And yes, Karl Anthony Towns had a bad playing game, but Cat is still their all-star caliber player. And right now, their best player, though that might change in the future, but he's still that star that they have. He's averaging 25 and 10, and yes, he will have to step up in the playoffs or in the future in general, but I think he has it. He has probably the best shooting center of all time, and he can pretty much do everything you want from a big man. He can pass, he can rebound. His defense has improved. His shooting, 41% from 3, is absolutely incredible, winning the 3-point contest. And Cat, yes, he isn't that like superstar that many people expected when he first entered the NBA, but I still think he can be a very good All NBA caliber player. He is on my All NBA 13 this year, and he can't play like he did in the playoffs, of course, because that's just not acceptable. But I think Cat still has it in him. He dropped 60 points this season, and Cat is definitely the real deal. Now, Anthony Edwards. Oh my, Anthony Ant-Man is the real deal, no doubt. Just watching him, you get the vibes that he's a future superstar. I I gotta admit, I haven't watched the most Timberwolves games. Now I have watched them more recently, but when you watch him, especially against that playing game, he's so good. I think they had a graphic like the most points before turning 21. Ant-Man was in the same conversation as LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, which is such great company for such a young person. And I think that Ant-Man, just with his athleticism, his shooting, getting around the basket, just shooting threes, taking over a game, he is, I think, potentially a superstar of this team, with Cat also, of course, being there. And he's only 20 and he's averaging already 21, 5, and 4, which those stats for a 20-year-old is absolutely incredible. And I think that building alongside Cat Edwards, that can be a duo that has one of the brightest futures in the entire NBA. Then you throw in D'Angelo Russell, and yes, he isn't that all-star like we expected with the Nets, but he's still a solid PG. He is overpaid a little bit, but against the Clippers, he stepped up. He's averaging 18, 7, and 3, and he's that playmaker that they really need. And this team, just those three guys, that is such a good offensive trio. And if their defense can step up like they have, this team's future is really scary. And then you have people like Malik Beasley, another bucket. You have Jaden McDaniels, another solid player who can be a 3-and-D player that they absolutely need. Jarrett Vanderbilt, like I said, yes, he won't put up the most points on offense, but he's going to be scrappy on defense and guards the opponent's best player. He's averaging 1.3 steals and almost a block a game, which that versatility is pretty much what they need. Then you have Naz Reid, another good backup center. And this team, yes, it might take a couple years, but they've already proven that they have an identity on the defensive side. And they can keep that up while also having the offensive talent that they have. This team's future is really scary. And yes, the West is loaded with talent. The Grizzlies, the Suns, probably like the Mavericks are always going to be there. But this Timberwolves team, I think, can establish as a perennial playoff team. And yes, maybe you want another, like, maybe you want to add some other players, that maybe another lockdown defender, maybe some more 3-and-D players, but still this Timberwolves team is really great. Is going to be really impressive. But for this year, how do they match up against the Grizzlies? And I wouldn't have them over the Grizzlies because the Grizzlies are one heck of a team, but I think the Wolves can push them to 6 games, in my opinion, because you have Cat, you have Edwards, you have D'Lo, who can all step up and win you a playoff game. Now, it is going to be the first playoffs for Edwards. Cat didn't have the best playoffs in 2018. D'Lo, yes, it's going to be like his second playoffs, I believe. And it's still a very inexperienced team, but I still think that against the Grizzlies, who are also an inexperienced team, I don't think they're going to win because the Grizzlies are good. But I think the Wolves can show so much fight, so much promise that they can build around. They have, I think, my opinion, Grizzlies in 6. But still, winning 2 playoff games for this Wolves team, especially with what they've been in the last couple of years, I think that's going to be so impressive, so good for morale. And I think that next season, this team's future is just so scary. So that's my thoughts with the Wolves. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on next time.